Dune Prophecy Episode 1, titled The Hidden Hand. And hell yeah, Kyle, I am so excited to start our Dune coverage. There's a bunch of things we need to just clear up at the top of this episode, just so everybody, because as like with all pilots of any show we cover, there's a little bit more just context we want to give you guys as fans, so you know where we're coming from. And what I'll say is that for me specifically, I never really dove too deep into the Dune lore. I never saw the original movies that first came out, but after this year in 2024, whenever you're listening to this, when Dune Part 2 came out, I just fell in love with the world. Like the second movie might be my favorite movie of the year. Timothy crushed it. Like I just love the lore that they started to bring through, and Denis Villeneuve crushed it as a director. Like he basically just roped me in, and now I am full into this universe. I love Arrakis. I love all these characters, these great houses. I'm just pretty infatuated with it. So I got so obsessed with Dune Part 2 that I ended up reading the first two books. And I'm pointing that out now just to say that I'm not a subject matter expert. I pretty much just sprinted through those books because I was so just high on Dune that I just wanted more of what I could get at that moment. But everything to do with this prequel series, I know no spoilers. I do know that there is prequel books written by Frank Herbert's son, who Frank Herbert was the main author of Dune. Then he passed away, and his son continued adding to his universe. And the thing I just want to put out there is that there may be spoilers online, like little tidbits of information that are inspired from the prequel books that his son wrote. But I think it's been said a bunch of times by the director and just everybody involved with the show that this show is less of an adaptation of those prequel books and more inspired. So they're going to have the freedom to do whatever they want, and they're going to connect it to the movies in whatever way they want. There's a lot of baggage that comes with that decision, but we can talk about that as we go throughout the episode. But I just want to pass over to Kyle, see what your experience with Dune has been.
That's a good segue because I feel very unburdened by knowledge and lore. I know absolutely nothing beyond the movies and the little bit of googling that I did during my second watch of just trying to understand things that maybe were confusing me, and I did run into that idea essentially that Brian, Frank Herbert's son, kind of took some maybe artistic liberties with writing a bunch of books after his dad passed away. And it seems like there's some conflicting canons and lore and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So I think, confusing myself even more by doing all of this Googling and all of that stuff. So I'm honestly interested to see what kind of discussions we get up to ourselves, what kind of, YouTube comments, Discord, all of that stuff. Of just hearing from people, because usually we're people that have read, especially me. I feel like a lot of the fantasy sci-fi shows that we've covered, like I've read the books, so I'm coming in from that angle. So it feels honestly refreshing to just be like a blank slate and
Mm-hmm.
just the things are cool. And I don't know if it's different than anything that's out there. It is what it is to me. And that being said, I really enjoyed the first episode. I thought it felt like the world from the movies, but obviously on like a smaller-ish scale because of the TV show. It's not like that amazing Denis. The sound design was similar. Oh, there goes my Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson off my shelf. But it was similar, and that felt good in the first like 10 minutes. I was like, okay, fuck yeah.
That's definitely something I had in my mind going in, because a lot of people, their expectations are through the roof because this is after Dune 2 came out. That's a 10 out of
Mm,
10 movie. Everybody loved it. You need to know that the cinematography was obviously going to take a step down because one of the best current directors isn't behind all of this. But I less care about that and more care about the world building and just, I guess what makes me slightly more biased is because I read the first two books. I do have a little bit of the more peripheral knowledge, so I'm able to probably connect some things in this prequel more than the average person. But that's why it's great to have you, because you're pure. Like you don't have any really interactions with the books, so you could tell me when I'm getting too ahead of myself and basically just enjoying things because I know of what's to come, or I know some connections that haven't been explicitly stated. So that's definitely important to point out. So I'm happy you said that. Yeah, you're basically just a movie only watcher. And I'm also in that weird spot where, while I did read the first two books, like I'm the opposite of a book purist. I couldn't care less if
yeah.
you break the established lore, because I am a movie purist almost, which is like weird to say for like one of the most famous
Yeah.
historical or famous sci-fi stories of all time. But what goes hand in hand with sci-fi, and I want this right off the top, is forgive us for pronunciations. There's some whack
Yeah.
names here, some families, some planets. We're probably going to get a couple things wrong here and there, but as the season goes on, we'll try and clean that up, make sure we start saying it better. And then the final last thing, and we can really start talking about this episode, is there's going to be 2 points where I'm going to bring in some level of like future lore spoilery stuff that it's not actually spoilers for the story, but just things that exist in the current Dune movies that I maybe can connect here. But it's not going to be a big deal. I promise you. Like it won't spoil anything at all.
Yeah.
So
If you haven't seen the movies, you should watch the movies.
1000%.
I'll say
Yes.
that too.
That's
That'll be the
yeah.
final thought of this opening sequence.
Okay. And then my thought that's going to kind of segue us in is I'm going to kind of lead you up with a question here because what I started to realize is that any issues I had with this episode, I think they're more issues in context of this story being related to the movies. And what I mean by that is that the fact that this show mainly takes place about 10,000 years before the movies, things like the Freeman politics on Arrakis, like we know where it's going to end up, and we kind of already got a glimpse into how it is now, and it doesn't feel like much changed. And that could be by design, but it also kind of limits the amount of plot and character growth we can have for those factions because it already feels like we're kind of close to where they are in Dune. And what I'll say is like those complaints extend over to the Bene Gesserit too, because they already have the main goal that they have in the year 10,000. They already have the voice, which I didn't expect them to necessarily have right away. I thought these were going to be the things that we saw slowly develop, but it seems like is it by design that over 10,000 years like the technology doesn't change, like the goals of the people don't change, the royal family is still the same that it is in 10,000 years from now. All of those things are where my complaints are, which says nothing about the episode itself, but it's like my I guess my question to you is just does it feel like is there does it feel like we're more restricted than we should be because we already have a lot of the end game pieces in place of where we end up in the Dune movie? I don't know.
Okay,
Like
I see what you're saying. So you're
that's what I'm
saying more
trying to say.
like House Carino is on the throne. We
Mhm.
know that they're also on the throne in the movies, so like there's not going to be some type of like overthrowing happening there. We know that the Bene Gesserit are still around 10,000 years later, so it's not going to end with like a plot like any plots to destroy the sisterhood aren't actually going to come to fruition because we know
No
they're still
stakes.
yeah,
Yes.
things
Yeah.
like that. I almost see that as maybe a positive. I maybe I have two thoughts about that. One thought being you could spin it as a positive in that maybe we're getting just like a really much more character focused story, and that we're really maybe analyzing the mindset of the emperor. I really think that he to me is like the most compelling character to me at the moment. I just find him the situation that he's in with the level of power he seems to have, but also they show us he doesn't have.
Mhm.
It just is interesting to me. I think the where we're at with the Harkonnen family stuff is interesting given what we know
Mhm.
in the movies and things like that. And I think the other part of that is I almost like I don't want to draw too many conclusions from the first
Agreed.
episode. You know, I think there's probably a lot of smaller things going on. While like we know these big hitter things are consistent, I think there's still a lot of wiggle room in the technical and the details and the things that can change. I mean, I'm not obviously familiar with a lot of the great houses, but maybe, you know, some of them might get stamped out in the course of this show. I mean, things like that. And it might honestly end up being cool that we know so much because of this idea of the prophecy
Mhm.
and we know that the Bene Gesserit are looking for these bloodlines and these swapping of bloodlines. And to me, it was like, oh wow, like we're already like it almost seems like they're on the cusp of being like, we gotta find the I'm gonna butcher this, but what the Kwisatz Haderach
Yep.
like
Yeah.
they're like, this is the marriage that's going to stabilize the line and things like
Mhm.
that. So I see it. I'm looking at it more as a positive that we know all these things
And
because
I'm
I think
fine
it
with
lets them
that.
play in the sandbox of the details
And
and not
there's
let like
no
the big overarching things.
like there is no reason that the Carinos can't lose power than getting it back too. Like that can definitely happen. Like there's internal political struggles between the great houses. I'm actually anticipating maybe not as much as like an emperor being dethroned, but things along those lines. There's got to be good political game, or else what's the point of really building up all of the lore here? So that will definitely happen, I think. But I
That's
guess, yeah, go ahead.
that's interesting to me because that really leads well into what I was googling getting here, because we get this in the opening scenes, we get this voiceover of saying what, the all these things that happened with the thinking machines, and how
Hmm.
like history was written by the Atreides that then cast out the Harkonnens, and like that was obviously from Valia Harkonnen's standpoint like a lie, and they did like that was wrong that the Atreides did that. And I was thinking like, why would the Atreides write the history? Wouldn't it be the Carinos writing the history since they have the power? And then I was trying to look up like what happened with that, and then one version of it like apparently Frank Herbert didn't give a ton of information
Right.
on House Carino. It just kind of started at the end of the what the show calls the Machine Wars, or whatever they
Hmm.
term they ended up using to not say Butlerian or whatever it is, jihad. But and then it was like, okay, and then Brian Herbert seemed to have his own idea of how House Carino started, where like it was a guy then created House Carino with the help of House Atreides after winning some battle on the planet
Hmm.
Carino. So that's what I was just like, I don't really know. And then I read something on the internet that was like, oh, I took it always as like House Carino was something that was like a name that just people adopted to keep that like pureness of House Carino, but like throughout 10,000 years, like there was different actual houses like assuming the name over time. So like
Ooh,
we might have room for that. Yeah, I guess I don't
that
really
that
know, but
I mean, I don't know either. So like that actually seems like a really good
yeah.
idea, because as we see throughout this episode, like the Nez is a female, and she was gonna give the name Carino, I believe, to Pruitt. So maybe like
Mhm.
in that same vein, like the bloodlines do kind of shift, but it'll still be the Carino, similar to Targaryens in Game of Thrones, right? We always take the main name. But yeah, this is a good time. Let's just go through all of the stuff that we know about the machine war. Like you said it best. Like I think fans were thinking it was weird that they didn't give it the proper name, but we also don't know if that's what it's going to be called in the show. So I'm going to go with the
True.
machine wars for now. And
It
this
just
I meant
reminds me of how much do you
of
know about the
Gear
Gear
Wars.
Wars?
Yes.
How familiar are you with the Gear Wars exactly?
Not at all.
Oh boy, I envy you.
I mentioned off the top I was going to bring up lore things that kind of matter in the future twice, and this is one of the things that I know. And it's kind of going off the back of what you just said there, where Frank, the dad, the main author of the Dune series, always envisioned, or at least it was assumed, that the machine wars wasn't literally how it's being portrayed in the show, where it's like Terminator. That's a
Yeah,
Brian Herbert thing, where it was straight up like, Skynet, right?
yeah.
Frank, there's been a lot of quotes and a lot of like reading between the lines. He kind of envisioned it as like the rulers of like Earth and whoever was around at the time were having struggles of what to do with AI and like how to control the people and stuff. That's what led to the machine wars and them banning them. But obviously, the canon for the show, and I guess if this extends to the
Mhm.
movies, is going to be Terminator. And I think that's almost fine, because it makes the Atreides badass as being like the first hero of the story that led to like the whole Emperor and like all of this piece. So, but that's just something that's worth bringing up. And yeah, I think we're about 116 years after the Machine Wars. I think at least the opening might be like 80 years, because it's before the 30-year time skip. So let's just go through some of this. You kind of brought it up. The Harkonnens got pushed out. The Atreides are getting praised. The Carinos get established all around this time period. And then that's when we meet the young version of, I think, who is going to be our main character here, Valia Harkonnen, who ends up becoming the leader of the Sisterhood. They didn't say Bene Gesserit yet.
Mm.
I also don't know off the top of my head if that's just
Yeah.
assumed to be the name of it, or they're going to coin that at some point. So for now, I'm going to again use what the show's giving me. It's Sisterhood, right? And she is known as the Mother Superior after she takes over for Raquella. And that's what this whole pre 30-year time skip is. We can kind of talk about whatever we want, because all in this quick montage, which I thought was like a good world building like
Mhm.
start, we find out who Raquella is, and she was the original Mother Superior. She was the one that came up with the breeding program that's so prevalent that it will eventually lead to Paul Atreides down the line, 10,000 years in the future, of the prophecy. So very cool stuff that it all started here. And this Raquella, who on her deathbed, she has the visions of the future, and you can read between the lines and see that it's like you see the sandworms, you see Arrakis, you see blood, you see the Galactic Empire spreading. A
Mm.
lot of metaphor could be taken from this, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. We could talk about whatever we want. and then we can lump in the last scene being Valia finally taking over as the ahead of Raquel's own granddaughter, Dorothea, I think her name is, when she uses the voice for the first time. So let's just take that huge chunk. I know we've already covered a decent amount because it was
Mhm.
about the Machine Wars, but anything specific you want to point out there?
So I'll probably lead this by saying I'll probably avoid all of like the vision prophecy stuff because that almost feels like it'll fit better as we talk about the rest of the episode because they almost immediately weaved in like every single part of the what she saw into this
Mhm.
episode. So I'm sure we'll get to all that at a different point. I'm probably going to reiterate something that you just said, that the voice being something that like Valia Harkonnen just like created in the first 5 minutes of this show was something that was very surprising to me. I thought it did a good job, I think, of just like really gaining or rather making us respect Valia. You know, like she's talking so highly of Raquella, and we see, you know, the flashback of Raquella in the war, and you know, that's like, okay, like she's a badass, and then she has
Mhm.
all the sisters following her, and then we see the torch get passed to Valia, and we see kind of the conviction that she has about you know, this breeding program and the value that the sisterhood can bring in terms of helping ensure stability within the empire and the universe. And I I don't know. I'm just so curious to think or hear, rather, we'll never get it, like what Raquel's vision was for like the breeding program working. Like what were her KPIs on success? Because it took them like 10,000 years to get, and like did that vision change over time? Like it doesn't seem like they were in this moment being like, let's create one perfect person. It was just, let's create better people. And I'm so curious if maybe Valia over the course of this prophecy, like Dune prophecy, is this when we get the creation of that prophecy? Because that would be very interesting.
That is what I'm hoping for, and I wish we were gonna have that, like, slow evolution of the reveal of the voice, like I already mentioned. It seems like
Mhm.
we're on the other side of that, we're not gonna get that. That's
Yeah.
fine. Just something I wanted to see, and it is really cool because I didn't know that a Harkonnen, not the first, originator of the sisterhood, but basically the second, right? Like, I didn't know
Mhm.
that that was a thing, and that's pretty cool, especially because I guess I'll save that for, like, after the time skip of, like, how she reacts to her own family, but, yeah, this was just, like, an interesting start. I hope that, yeah, I think it'll be good. It's a little sad that Dorothea, I think that's how you pronounce her name.
Yeah.
She died right away because I thought that the riff within the sisterhood of those for the breeding program and those who think it's impure for the soul, I thought that was like basis for like a good half season of plot right there. And then
Yeah.
that's like snuffed out right away. So they did crush a bunch of things that almost could have been its own season in itself. Like all of that pre 30-year time skip
Mhm.
could have been season one, and then we move over to the second version of Valia where the plan's already in motion. That's what I really thought the show was going to be, but it seems like we're skipping past step one, like it just already happened, and the plan is in motion. And if you're ready, we could just skip there and start talking about it. Are you good on
Yeah.
the
I
stuff?
guess just my one comment on that, um, kind of not upsetting, but like them not going that route with the Darte and her zealots against Valia. It almost seems like we're getting that in. We're going to get that in reverse, where now Valia herself is the zealot and demands like that complete obedience to her vision, and we're going to have other people now within the sisterhood that are going to find cracks in the
Mhm.
breeding program and the way that she goes about things. So I think we'll still get that idea, just
And
in reverse.
for what it's worth, what I've read is that in general, the Bene Gesserit were built up to be more competent in the movie version than the books.
Hmm.
This is showing it where it does feel it's more aligned with like the movie vision of they're
Yeah.
not just like bumbling through to a plan that eventually works. But so it's going to be interesting to see if how many cracks they end up showing us, how vulnerable like the sisterhood is and how united they become by the end of the show. I don't know if you know, is this supposed to be one season? Like
Oh, I
there's
had
an
no clue.
infinite. Okay, yeah, there's an
I
infinite amount of things they
remember
could do because they could just
yeah, I
keep
remember
going.
maybe after I don't remember when it got for this first got announced. If it couldn't have been after Dune 2 because that was so recently, but I just remember hearing it and being like, "That's fake. Like they're not making a Dune TV show." And then it was like a
Right.
real thing, and I was like, "Whoa!" And that was really all I looked into it until they started announcing the date and the trailers, which I still didn't watch. But same thing with the
Mhm.
video game. I was like, this isn't a real thing. And then they came out and
Yeah.
made a video
Yeah.
game, and I was like, okay, Dune Fever is
I'm
sweeping the
loving it, man.
nation. But
Here
yeah, I
for
don't
it
know
all.
anything honestly about the show and the length, all of that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll leave it at that then. So let's now, after all the preamble set up, we have this time skip, and that's when you get like the Star Wars, like like the subtitles
Yeah.
explaining the time period that we're in. So, like I said before, now we are 116 years after the Great Machine Wars and 10,148 years before Paul Atreides. Not sure why they had to be that specific, but I love it. Everybody knows when history happens like that, everything gets lost. Who cares? This is going
Yeah.
to be a very interesting case study on why the technology is basically where it is in Dune now. That is, I also can couple that with my complaints earlier. Like, is that a defect? Like, is that a design flaw, or is that on purpose that like they have the shields already and they basically look the same as they do 10,000 years in the future? I know the whole idea is that thinking machines are now banned and outlawed because of the Great Machine War, but does that really mean complete stagnation of just basic technology? Because if you told me this was 10 years before Dune 1 or 2, it would make sense to me. Nothing would be out of place because of the tech level and how explored they are throughout the galaxy. That is my hardest thing I'm coming to terms with. But again, it could be by design. And as the show goes on, you really see a push to stifle any technological innovation. And if we don't see that, that's going to be a common complaint I have throughout the season, because that needs to almost be addressed, because I don't see how they get nowhere in 10,000 years. I understand they're not using computers and things, but they're still flying around space. They still have modern day technology of like architecture and stuff. Like, there should be some things that are different, but who knows? You tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I feel like in one hand, I actually really like that idea that literally nothing has changed in
Mhm.
10,000 years, but also I feel like it's almost too early because we don't know a ton about what technology is going on. I mean, like I said, the architecture looks very similar and that kind of stuff, but I'll be interested if we get to like G80 Prime to see the
Mhm.
Harkonnen planet, because at this point they don't only been there for like 113 years because they kind of got banished there. So is it like in that 113 years it looks like that just huge industrial mass with the black sun that we saw in Dune 2, even though that was admittedly something they made up for Dune 2.
So cool
So
though.
like are there like do they have ornithopters right now?
That's, yeah, these
I
are the
don't know if we'll get
questions.
to Arrakis, but like, they mentioned that like a lot of the spice mining stuff was old, but they didn't it's not 10,000 years old. So like has there been small innovations in that sense? And then we also have this uh Lord or Count Richise.
What'd
I'm
she say?
butchering
Okay.
that again, I'm sure. And he seemed is someone like a tech guy who like talks about kind of almost like the innovation of his ships. So
Mhm.
maybe there's something there. And maybe stuff starts to happen and then it has to get stamped out, and it starts to happen and then it has to get stamped out. There's certain people try to push those boundaries and then they have to kind of come down on it. That's why I'm really interested in the Emperor. I'm so curious of what type of power he'll wield in reality over the course of this season in this show.
As long as it's addressed, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
I'm pointing it out because it is going to be
Yeah.
something I probably
Well,
bring up at least every other episode until we figure some answers out of how it's possible that there was no
yeah.
like
And
innovation and everything.
there was no what are like the human computers?
Mentats. They're not
Yeah.
around yet, because
Yeah.
what they are just biologically evolved computers, which that should take thousands of years for that something like that to happen. And I don't think they exist in this time
Yeah.
until I see
So
different. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's an innovation.
Okay. So let's talk about how we're gonna do the rest of this episode now that we're in like the quote unquote modern time of this show is we're gonna split it by the planets because they kind of cleanly split. So we'll just talk through first Wallach 9. This is the home planet of the Sisterhood and where everything to do with Valia kind of takes place. And she is 30 years after taking over, just kind of the ruler of I don't want to say Bene Gesserit, the Sisterhood, so I'll keep using that. The truth sayers, right? Like, she's overseeing this school of these apprentice truth sayers. And it sounds like the plan's going well, right? Like we have these truthsayers as now a very common and important part of the politics going on in the empire, where they're sending them to all these different leaders. I keep associating them with like Aes Sedai because we're going that route
Yep.
so hard. Like they're in the training, and then now they're the political advisors essentially. So we're basically already past the obstacle of making that a thing where truthsayers are almost just go hand in hand with just your court jester, and like they're like a mandatory part almost of just having power in one of the great houses. And we start this off, and I'm starting it right at the beginning because I thought a very interesting line was Valia is being asked, like, hey, we have all these requests from these different houses that want a new truthsayer. And then she agrees for two, and then she ends up talking about the Harkonnens, which is her own family, and she rejects the request, and she says for the fourth time.
Yeah.
What did you take from that? Are you, because I was under the impression that based on the narration in the very beginning of the episode that she wanted to almost restore some historical integrity of the Harkonnens, but now it seems like she's almost trying to distance herself. And I would be happy either way if she's like anti her own family because of their negative reputation, and which would make sense in Dune of why we didn't really associate it like that. But it would also be cool if she's like working in the shadows to have her own selfish interests and make the Harkonnens great again, which eventually happens in the Dune movies. So how did you take that? Is she actively anti-Harkonnen, or is there plans within plans here?
I'm inclined to believe there's plans within plans. I think it, although, I mean, I don't mind like a character flaw of hers being this, her past and her family name, because it doesn't seem like she has any flaws at this point beyond like her like passion and how she rules things with an iron fist. So I could see it going either way, which is a terrible answer, but I'm hoping that it's the plans within the plans thing. Like
Right.
maybe she has kind of, it seems like this core three, she has her actual sister,
Tula.
and
Yep.
then she has her the sister that's with the emperor. I have it written down so many times. Where is it?
Kasha.
Yes, Kasha. And then there was a fourth one that was in that little conference that they had when they mentioned what Tira and Arafel, when they said that there's this, basically this apocalypse that's coming, this revelation, this reckoning that they're trying to avoid as with the sisterhood. And maybe there's not any sisters that she trusts enough to send them to the Harkonnens because she wants like complete control over like what happens there. That's the only maybe angle I can see there. I know later on in this they kind of go through some recruits and they mention who is like her favorite. So maybe waiting till she becomes like a full sister, and then maybe she gets sent to the Harkonnens. I don't know. I'm interested to see, because they obviously made that a huge point that won't just go uncovered and untouched for the rest.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because she talks about the Harkonnens right in the beginning too. So we did see we end up seeing one on in the wedding celebration, but it doesn't seem like they're a respected great house, right, at the time. So that is going to be something that's going to be fun to watch them rise if it does happen in this time period. That would be cool.
Yeah. And funny thing with your Aes Sedai comment is that someone, I think Dreama, in the Discord, there's been a lot of Discord chatter about the show, which has been really fun, mentioned that exactly. Like it reminds me of Wheel of Time, but Wheel of Time was heavily influenced from Dune. So
I will be diving into that Dune Discord more often than not soon. We're on the finale coverage right now of MGM Plus is From, and then I'm a free agent after this, so I'm excited to fully immerse myself in Dune because this was a good start. So let's get back to just, I guess, like the sisterhood, like the school. I don't even know if that's what it really is, but anyway, we see other parts of it and we see some moving plot points here. There's not a ton, but what the main takeaway I got from the pilot was that the prince, the prince who is that prince? Yeah, I guess.
It's kind of tough. You mentioned he's a half brother to Nez, which almost implies that he's a bastard. But I'm not entirely sure how the culture works. But he's obviously in a position where he can't inherit because he's not like a full son.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm assuming we'll get more details about that. That seems like a very interesting part of his character because he comes off as this very confident guy. So hopefully, I hope we explore him more to, and I could see that being like a sore point.
Mhm.
But I don't know culturally if bastards are a thing.
Yeah, they're gonna have to clarify that because again, I don't know either, and we didn't get much in Dune because there's just like the clean air being like Florence Pugh, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're at here, where the prince is coming here to essentially bargain on behalf of his sister, who is the heir. I think. Did they say that? Like they said for sure, like she is next up, right? It's not just
Yeah.
because okay, yeah. So she's
That was
gonna end up.
shocking to me.
You thought so?
I guess because I've only ever really heard of there being emperors
Hmm.
in Dune, I wasn't aware of a woman ever being on the throne of the Imperium with the little that I know. So it was kind of shocking to me. And that almost leads me to believe that like it ain't gonna work out that cleanly
Right, that someone will be
for
pulling the
Nez.
strings. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. But her plan is to come and study for a decade on this planet and basically learn some of the skills of the Truthsayer, which are so important because you find out in the name itself, like they're supposed to be masters of like their biology, right? Like
Mhm.
they can observe everything down to like your pupils dilating, your body language. They're supposed to be able to like hear everything. And that's where the voice creation comes from. It's supposed to be like masterful manipulation of your vocal cords to hit like a certain pitch that makes you more able to be controlled. So like they're just
Yeah.
masters of like biology because again, you got to remember everything is anti-technology, but that pushes humanity to evolve their biology, which is why there's mentats in the future and things like that. So it's cool to see a little bit of that. I did not know that they train to fight, but I guess that's just going to be a relevant thing. Everybody could throw hands, which is pretty cool.
Seems like
And
why
then
not, I guess.
yeah, I get exactly like there's no need not to be good at fighting, I guess.
Yeah.
But then we meet all the pupils, the apprentices, if you want to call them. I don't know what they're called yet, or the acolytes, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
if
they
that's
called
the
him
name of
sister
like the
too.
yeah, so it's not as
Like
clean
Sister
as like
Jen.
the Wheel of Time world building yet. We'll
Yeah.
get the terminology hopefully soon, but
Mhm.
I don't want to really throw any opinions out on the acolytes yet because I don't really know much, but they are probably going to be front and center as we find out later when Tula, who is Valia's sister, they're talking like they each have a favorite, like they're
Mhm.
biased humans, right? Like they're probably going to be pushing strings for their favorites. So it's going to be interesting to see how they evolve. And then we also yeah, so I guess I'll pause there. Is there anything you want to bring up just like in general about
I
the
liked
academy?
I'm kind of liking the mystery of all the acolytes kind of backstories at this point. It seems like the small one that's struggling, whose name escapes me, who's Tula's favorite, was almost like adopted by the sisterhood, which she seemed like she was an orphan that kind of just grew up in the castle, let's say, in the school, and she didn't really have a choice. While similar to Talia's favorite, where they mentioned that she really has no other choice but to be loyal to them because she's all they know. And then we have Jen makes up the story about killing her parents, but there's some truth to it. So
Mhm.
I'm interested to explore their backstories, and especially from this idea that I'm kind of formulating as we talk of there's going to be a split. It feels like in the sisterhood about the truth of what Talia is doing, the way that she does it,
You're
and
saying
all of that
Talia,
stuff.
Valia,
Valia, I'm so sorry. Yes,
and then Tula.
yes.
Do you think they're gonna be on opposite sides, like the sisters? The actual sisters? Are they
Um,
they're actual sisters, right? Because they
that's
talk
how
about
I
their
took it.
mom. Yeah, they
Yeah,
talk about
that's
their
how I took
mom
it.
at one point. Yeah, Tula
Yeah,
and
unless
Valia are
yeah,
actual
unless we're
Harkonnens.
drinking the Kool Aid. Yeah, I could see that. I wasn't totally thinking that, but the more that we talk about it, and I can see the emotional impact of that, of them splitting
Mhm.
and like what that does for the sisterhood. And we have, maybe people that are like the true empaths and like actually care about people versus the power hungry side, which obviously Valia would lead. So
Mhm.
just like, are we going to get these students, these acolytes developing relationships, and then the split of the sisterhood is going to throw them on opposite sides of things? That could add a nice emotional punch for us. So we'll see.
Yeah. That sounds like a fun pathway forward. I would really hope that they do
Yeah.
something like that rather than it just be everything
Yeah.
clean on that side
I
because
could see
it's not gonna work out
Jen.
like that.
Jen's a killer. So I could see
Yeah, she
Jen
is.
almost taking
What
someone out and then maybe getting taken out herself.
She's just a normal ass name, Jen.
Yeah, it just makes me laugh. Well,
And then we got
perfect segue into Constantine. What a name that is. That's great. He
Oh
came in
yeah.
Constantine, and I might have missed the part about how he wasn't the heir. I think I overlooked that on my first watch because I was like, okay, his name's Constantine. He's a young, handsome guy. Like, is he not the heir? I didn't really understand because Constantine's that's a strong name. That's a nice. And we know like the Atreides themselves traced a lot of their lineage back to like the Greeks and Romans, and like they like that aesthetic. So like I was thinking like, okay, this guy's obviously the heir, and then nope, he's got an interesting life. Like I mentioned, whatever 5 minutes ago, I'm interested to learn more about him too.
Yeah, because he's not the heir and he's slightly less important, and he's just like the drug partier kind of guy. Like
Yeah,
I
it's like
feel
the
like
backup QB in college. That's like the move.
he's living the life. Yeah, like he's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
gonna have he either strikes me as somebody that's gonna be like a tragic death because like he isn't the main guy, or there's gonna be some like he has his own hidden motivations. But right now he seems
Yeah.
pretty in sync with his sister, and it doesn't seem like he has
Mhm.
any bad will towards her, which I like that path. So we'll see how that
Yeah.
gets. But finishing up because there's only like two more things that happen on this planet, then we could talk about the Emperor's planet. Uh, we're kind of skipping ahead to in the episode, like the wedding already happened, and Kasha had her visions of like the nightmare of what's to
Mhm.
come if they keep going with their plan. So she ends up returning back to the planet to tell the sisters that she needs to stop the wedding. Like if this union happens, it's going to end up having a butterfly effect. It's going to be horrible for the empire, horrible for like the universe or the galaxy, whatever you want to say. And then we're going to loop this into her last scene, which is in parallel with spoiler for the other side, Pruitt dying.
Mhm.
We have her also kind of being afflicted. It looks like the same thing where her skin's like almost like melting. And as she's dying, Valia sees this and says, like, I see mother, referring back to what Raquella foresaw for
Mhm.
Valia. So like it was like a really good place to end the episode. And I know I'm cutting to the chase because we're switching the two buckets, but yeah, I was pretty sad to see Kasha die because I thought she had a lot to offer, and because she wasn't so 100% obedient, I thought she was going to stick
Mhm.
around a bit more. But it did feel like, especially on the rewatch, when she says bye to Nez, who she has like a good relationship with, she's like, "I'll be right back," and she's like, "That's definitely the last time you guys are going to see each other." It did have that finality to it, so it's sad to see that she died, but they kind of foreshadowed it a little bit.
Yeah, two things. Very interested in the mechanism of her seemingly burning from the inside.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in the next bucket, I would assume. And the second one being I I can't wait to see the aftermath of this because we have Valia pretty much telling her to like suck it up basically, Kasha, like we're this close, you have the emperor's ear, like now's not the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then she almost like she doesn't smile, but it almost is like another clue that she's looking for and is okay with seeing the burning body and like the embers floating in the air that they've showed us a couple times. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just interested to see how she interprets this. Like it seems like she's taking this like, oh, this is a positive sign. Like we're on the right track. Like
Yes.
stinks for Kasha, but like we're getting the signs of the prophecy. Like we're getting there.
And I do want to talk about, we can talk about it now because we're going to talk about it more later, but like, what do you think happened? Because I don't have any answers here at all about any idea of was it poison? Was it directly linked to what was happening to Pruitt, or was that a like a red herring by the cinematography of it all? Because they're trying to force that link, and it did happen at the quote unquote same time that we're being shown, but maybe it's a red herring and it like actually could be two unrelated things. I don't know because that technology, whatever it is, like what connects her to Pruitt? I don't see any connection there because didn't she just meet the Richisi? What is it? Richisis? What are we calling them?
Richesse? I don't know.
All right,
That's not what I
we're
said
gonna
the first
revisit
time.
that. Yeah, the Richesse.
Yeah, Richesse, maybe me putting a little bit too much of an Italian flair on that.
Yeah, Richesse.
Yeah. This was something we talked about a lot in the Discord. I initially was when I first watched it was more of a mind that it wasn't poison. And I definitely, if they tried to red herring, I bought it because I was totally thinking these things are happening at the same time. There's some type of established connection it almost feels like, between the two of them. I don't know what that means because there's not like really magic in
No,
Dune. So
yeah.
there has to be some type of explanation to it. Poison seems too convenient given the distance between them when we're supposed
Yeah.
to assume that it occurs. So I think it's Desmond has they're just throwing it in our face that there's more than meets the eye. There's a
Yeah.
lot going on beneath the surface. So I don't believe it's poison.
And also, I don't see the sisters having an ulterior motive of doing it themselves. Like, even if Valia is taking a wicked satisfaction in this because of how it affects her vision of the prophecy, I don't think she did it or had any hand in it.
No.
Do you
Well, at the
agree?
very least, she definitely didn't want Pruitt to die because the whole
Right.
plan is based on the fact that he's too young to be of age. So like
Yes.
buys them the time for Nez to come and learn.
Yes, and then she
So
would be
like
the
he's
first
the
sister on the
perfect
throne, yeah.
match. Yeah, she
Yeah.
mentions that like, like this is because um her sister Tulla
Tula.
is kind of like, why don't you check the registry? Like make sure, because after Kasha comes back with all these concerns and she checks the registry. Side point being, I want to look at what the registry is.
Me
Like, what is
too.
that? What
Yeah.
does that even mean? It's such a generic term. I want to get in there. And she says, like, no, yeah, this is the match that will stabilize the Carino line for whatever it might be, centuries and that. But like, what does that really mean? Because she also has a quote right before that where it's, what does she say? Our aim is to not broaden the princess's worldview. It's to adhere her to our own.
Mhm.
And those two things are like kind of related, but the adhering the princess to our worldview, does that mean like so that she's like super in on the breeding stuff, which will then create stability? Or is it like, what is really the benefit of having a sister on the throne? Obviously, at a surface level, she's sympathetic to your cause, and that's positive.
Mhm.
But like, does it go beyond the breeding program and all of that stuff? So
So what you said earlier about stabilizing the Carino line was the thing that caught my ear the most. That's so interesting to me because, like you said, what does that actually mean? But is it more about projecting forward who, like, the future heirs of these bloodlines crossing will potentially be the male version that can actually like learn the voice? Like, I don't know what they're thinking or
yeah,
what that actually means yet, besides maybe like less susceptible to disease and like more pure like DNA. I really have no idea what
yeah,
that could
yeah. Like,
possibly mean.
does it come down to a DNA thing, like a eugenics program, or is it more just to have an empress that was trained as a sister and will instill those values in her heir? But that feels too risky to then be like, okay, now that heir, like Nez's kid, will then have to pass it to the other,
Mhm.
their own kid, and then their own kid, and then the connection probably gets lost over time. Obviously, you're going to keep having sisters in the ear of the Carino emperor slash empress. So I just want more
I would
information. I want
be
more
s I would be
Valia
sort of,
talking.
yeah, disappointed if we didn't get details on that breeding program past what we have right now. I
Yeah,
mean, it's cool that it is like a little basically like hard drive that they can like look at because of tech is weird now, but I
yeah.
want more. We definitely need more there. So
Mhm.
let's keep going on the second planet here. Because now that we're done with that, the first part, we're gonna go to Salusa Secundus, which is the home planet of the Emperor's family, the Crinos that we've been talking about this whole time. And
Great name.
a fantastic name. I was like very surprised to find that they were on the throne, like connecting all the way up into the movies. But who knows if
Mhm.
they lose power, gain it, if they change the name of who actually has that title. Either way,
It's happened
more
before in
interestingly,
history, in
yeah,
like real history. People have just been like,
you just
let me get that last name.
exactly like and just
Yeah.
pass it on, even though it's not technically the
Mhm.
same genes or whatever. But more interestingly, when we do jump over to this planet for the first time, we meet our first Atreides, which
Yes.
hell yes,
He's like
Kira,
a boss too. Kieran.
right? Kieran, are you
It was
sure it has an
Kieran.
N?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm dumb.
I
Sorry.
thought so. Maybe that's
Hey,
me projecting a real name like Jen onto it, but I thought it was Kieran.
let me check right now. Kieran, you're right. You're totally right.
Yeah.
So yeah, he is essentially Gurney,
Gurney.
right? Like, yeah, like
Yeah.
he is like the trainer, which is so cool because the Atreides are just known for being badass fighters, and like it
Yeah.
was in the Great Machine War, in the Dune movies, they're just all badass fighters. So it makes sense that that's his place here, and I'm sure we're gonna see the fluctuation of House Atreides, and like he seems to be somebody that's gonna have an important role to play. But this was our first introduction into the heir Nez, or Yunez, if like is her formal name with a Y. I don't know what we'll settle on because it seems like different people call her different things. Nez seems cleaner for us.
I
You
like
good
the
with that?
nickname.
Yeah, Nez is a
Makes
cool
us feel more
nickname.
familiar with her, like she's a friend.
Yeah. And I guess let's just open it up to the two main scenes that I just want to talk about, because there probably is some things to break down here. Is the Emperor talking to the Duke, or uh,
I don't know.
Richise? I
Duke?
don't know if he's a Duke or
Yeah.
not yet, but they
Count?
did
Not sure.
count either way. It's just the person that's going to be the head of the like Pruitt, like the head of the
Mhm.
family that's supposed to take over and basically support the emperor on Arrakis, so that spice production is safe, easier, and it spreads throughout the empire, making everybody rich. That's like
Mhm.
what this whole agreement is about. Is if Nez marries his heir, that's like their agreement. It's just like a very basic, world building just moment where you're going to join two great families for the same purpose. And that's going to be interesting because it does seem like this guy's a little sketchy, this family, and he's probably going to directly blame the emperor's family for the murder of his heir. So that's going to be fun fireworks. And also throwing it out there that I don't recognize the name, and maybe it's just somebody. It's like it becomes a lesser house, but I'm assuming, or at least predicting, that there's going to potentially be a snuff out of this family name, just because I don't know, like they're not one of the main houses I know from the movies.
This guy's pretty uppity. He
Yeah.
seems like someone that's ripe for feeling like he's too big for his britches. So I could see that being a possibility for sure. I thought that this scene was a really great way to show us just how much Kasha has the Emperor's ear. The
Hmm.
Emperor, this negotiation scene before the wedding, the Emperor knows that this guy's a dickhead and is trying to pull one on him. And Kasha just kind of says to him, like, she just pretty much convinces him, and he's like, okay.
Hmm.
Like he really believes what she says, and it's so interesting to think about. Like we mentioned, like it hasn't been that long for the sisterhood, and they're already these really heavily favored advisors of this emperor. And I'm so curious to know, did his dad really have one in his ear as well so much? I'm just his place in the history. It's so early in the empire, and that's such an interesting time period for these things to happen, because usually, the guy who creates the empire, or woman who creates the empire, that's when it's like the strongest, because they kind of got everyone to bend the knee. And then when the power transitions the first time, it's no one wants
Hmm.
to actually respect the heir. And then a second time, and are we creating a little bit of legitimacy, or are there more cracks in the foundation? So I think that this Richise guy really thinks there's cracks in the foundation. He knows, I think, that the Emperor is weak, especially militarily. The Emperor, I think, knows that he's weak militarily, so he needs to lean on whatever resources he has at his disposal. And I just thought they did a great job of showing us how reliant he is on her counsel, and how like almost cautious he is to offend anyone that he thinks he might need, which
Hmm.
is just an odd place for an emperor to be, because you're supposed to be the guy.
And he does seem pretty nuanced. Like he has like a soldiering background. Like I don't
Mhm.
know if he necessarily wants the power, which is always a good thing in a leader, but at the same time, does it make you vulnerable to like basically being assassinated because you're not paranoid all the time and like trying to keep that power? But instead, you're right, he's just trying to take the advisement of the sisterhood. And
Yeah.
the thing you have to keep in mind though is, while 30 years have passed and like the influence of the sisterhood has been expanding, we don't know how long. I don't believe it was stated how long Raquel was doing this before she
Yeah.
died. So there could have been a couple decades where like the last couple of emperors were also slowly getting greased to basically be ready to be influenced like this. Who knows? They weren't too specific on that. But the the thing to bring up before we get into the wedding scene, and we could talk more about these like politics, is the introduction of Desmond Hart, who
Yeah.
I definitely think is just like the most interesting character right now. You said the Emperor. I love Desmond.
I
I
think
know he's
Desmond's
pretty
too.
famous. he's pretty famous from like he's pretty popular right now. Like he was one of the I think he was the main character of the show Vikings. He
Yeah.
was in Raised by Wolves. Like he's all over the place, and he's a good actor. He's definitely, and like I've seen him speak in like interviews. Like he seems like a fun guy. So like I'm excited for him to be a main character here. And what we learn about him is that he's basically just a soldier that has done 12 tours or whatever they say on Arrakis, which is insane because you usually die after a couple because it's so unstable. It's just like the Freeman, the weather,
Yeah.
like all of it. It's just crazy. You don't want to go there. But he is here specifically to tell the Emperor about a an internal rebellious attack from one of the Emperor's own planets who went and messed with the spice production and stole the spice, because the Emperor just assumed, probably just like the underlings of the Emperor, that it was the Freeman and there was like a normal dispute which happened that usually wouldn't even get brought up the chain. But this is something that's definitely important because of, not just because of like the scenes we get later, but also just because, like, who is it? Who's going to be the first rebel? Because this might be like the first actual rebellion since they united from the Machine Wars, and that's super relevant. It could be anybody. But it sounds like you like Desmond too.
Yeah, I think that I was shocked at how, not shocked at him being so confident, but the level of access he just immediately has to the Emperor. It seems, and you just mentioned that it seems like the Emperor has somewhat of a military soldiering background, and I'm almost curious if that's kind of what it is, and maybe I'm just completely headcanoning that, where it's like the Emperor kind of misses maybe the days of being a soldier, and this guy's kind of like reminds him, like he can just kind of have a combo with this guy about the military and that stuff versus like having to be the emperor and make decisions and things. And I'm leaning towards 95% of me just headcanoning that onto him. But I was just shocked throughout this episode of how casual their conversations are about things. But I was
May
very curious how Kasha reading him in this scene was going to go. And I was really glad that it came out like he's telling the truth, but I liked the little like almost
play
eye
on
to
it.
eye, like white, not white lie, but like at least he believes it to be true. So like seeding that little bit of doubt. And then we learn that she's obviously involved in the plot that happened on Arrakis. So it's, it behooves her to seed that type of doubt in him, in the Emperor, that is. So I did not, with Desmond, I didn't think it was going to escalate to what he's doing later in this episode. I thought he would just be kind of a guy that's like those guys that like kind of cut through the bullshit and see the reality of things while all the pomp and the circumstance of court kind of go on, and he would be like a good tool for the Emperor that way. But it don't seem like that's his role. That kind of got flushed very quickly.
He is going to be the catalyst that makes this show worth being a show, I think, which it already is starting, right? Like he's going to be the thing that's like a riff in within the Emperor's home planet, and is going to cause all these political strikes. It's going to be amazing to watch because I just think so. I guess it's weird to think, because my only loyalties on this show are to the Atreides, because I will die for Paul Atreides. So because no Atreides are in power, and they're probably not targets right now, if he causes chaos and starts murdering people in some way, I'm just here for the chaos and the entertainment. They're not Atreides, but the second he starts messing with my family, that's when we're gonna have an issue. So right now, I just want the entertainment. And it looks like he's gonna be the biggest driver, because so far I've been the happiest like when he's on the screen. But there's a lot. I'm happy you brought up the thing about him believing what he was saying, because that's totally there by design. Like there's no way.
Yeah.
Like there's gonna be more to him about like what his true motivations are. I kind of want to save that conversation for a little bit, so I'm gonna bypass that for now, because a couple of other just background things that happens. I don't know if you have anything you want to bring up with about the Empress Natalia. Shout out to the Witcher Queen Calanthe if you didn't catch that.
She looked very familiar, but I
Yeah,
didn't make that
yeah.
connection. She's
She
good.
was great in The Witcher for what scene she had. But yeah, she seems to be in an almost unhappy marriage with the Emperor, who doesn't really trust her. There seems to be some turmoil in their backstory because they're not on the same page about all that. But she actively doesn't want this marriage, but the Emperor needs the marriage because the most important thing in the universe is spice, and like this is their only way to gain control over it. So they're kind of at odds here, but she just gets run over, and like he doesn't care, and neither does Nez. Nez is almost saying that she's getting what she wants. Like she's also a player in this game. Like she doesn't need to be handheld, which I kind of like. I want Nez to be her own thing rather than just like a puppet. But yeah, so like that this is just them talking about the plans of her marrying
Mhm.
the 9-year-old boy who then she's happy that he's young because then she can mold him to be whatever she wants, which is a cool idea. Just a bunch of like little in between scenes. And then I think it's basically time for the wedding. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think with the scene with the emperor and his wife, that it's so tough sometimes when she's right. Like she's not wrong,
mhm.
but he's also half right, but is blinded to the other half of it. So she is going to be a very interesting character for how she deals with all of that. She kind of explodes a little bit at the wedding, or at least not. Was it a wedding? I don't know. At the
Yeah.
ceremony, and I, this is like a half baked thought, but I mean, her and Desmond, their worldviews kind of align.
I was just thinking the same thing. They have similar goals, right?
Yeah, and they don't make a perfect match, obviously, by any means, but that's like there, and that's something I'm twiddling around. So I don't know
That
what's gonna
that would be
happen there,
oh yeah, I'm
but
all in on her being part of the reason he did what he did.
yeah, I'm just interested in because I mean, she's right. Like the sisterhood is purposely making this marriage so that they can indoctrinate Nez,
Mhm.
and we find out that they're involved in all of the hijinks on Arrakis to weaken the Emperor. So like she's so right, and it's just what is she gonna do about it? How does she find out? How does she confirm that she's right? Is she gonna search for evidence? Desmond is kind of the evidence.
Mhm.
How do they spare? That's gonna be interesting to follow. I'm gonna be probably disappointed now if nothing happens there, but for now, the
No,
potential is
they're highlighting her as like an independent thinker too much for her to not have any payoff. Like she's got to have some part of a plan, even if it doesn't end up working out. Like she's gonna have more. I'm guessing. Again, we don't do trailers and we don't have spoilers, so we're all just guesswork here. But let's talk about the wedding itself, which it was going pretty straightforward. Like it was everything was going according to plan. And then even like the small talk that was happening before the AI lizard thing pops out,
yeah.
where this is where
This
we
kid's
get
a
to
fucking
see
punk though.
yeah, this kid is a punk,
Yeah.
which screw Pruitt, but we do get I'm only taking this excuse or to bring up the Harkonnens because this is when we see
Mhm.
the current Baron Harkonnen, right? Like
Yeah.
the one who he seems to be like a lesser house. While he's still invited to the grand wedding, it doesn't seem like they have the respect, which is totally in line with what we've been being told in the intro of the whole show. I do like that he does like kind of fixate on how whales are like their main source of
Yeah.
income, and he's talking about the whatever all that stuff. But
The
it's going to
welcome.
be cool to see how the Harkonnen family evolves because that's probably going to be one of the families that changes the most throughout this show.
Yeah, I mean that goes back to when we were talking about the technology shifts over time of it doesn't seem like this guy lives on Giedi Prime with a bunch of bald people in this like super metal industrial
Mm-hmm.
planet that like just pumps out money and pollution and all that stuff. So I hope that that's like a B, C, or D plot is like that progression of the house, which like we mentioned, Valia kind of seems intent on delaying.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So
exactly.
we'll see. Because
Yeah.
clearly, there. I mean, that whole scene is showing us that they're like so low.
Yeah, the
The
Emperor's like,
Emperor
"Give me that
does not
here."
care. Yeah, what they say. He's literally talking about whale byproducts. It's just like it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yes, for sure. All right, I'm gonna be bringing the Harkonnens up every chance I can, so just keep that ready to be talked about. Uh,
That's
so is there anything you wanna say about the lizard, like that Desmond ends up stabbing? I think it's just a cool way to show the actual like visible fear that a lot of these people have just because it's ingrained to
mhm.
their society. When at the same time we find out that basically the Ricci family or whatever is kind of trying to be the first step into laxing the strictness around like the technology because Pruitt
Mhm.
ends up saying like we got to be a little bit looser with this. So that's an interesting thought because like it's only been 116 years. We still got 10,000 to go, and like there's not a lot of room for technology to bubble up. So it's interesting to me that there's already like a subplot of background technology fans almost. Like
Yeah, people trying to
I
push
didn't
those boundaries again.
I didn't think it was going to take that route, but it does seem like it was cool to see everybody like, oh my God, like there's a computer
Yeah,
thing right there. Like that was a cool
yeah,
reaction until
'cause
Desmond just messes it up.
it is a cool little lizard. Like,
Yeah.
for me, I would be like, "That thing's sick," and everyone else was like, "That thing's sick."
Yeah.
For me, the main takeaway was the way that the Emperor kind of rolls over in like, this seems almost like the gravest sin you could commit in society,
Hmm.
and he's just like, "Let's overlook this transgression for now," which for now seems like an interesting choice of words.
I,
But it's
I
again,
think
it's
it,
just his willingness to not not wield power in ways that you would almost expect him to. He's kind of he's sitting down instead of like standing up almost in these situations where he's letting this guy off the hook because this guy has what he needs. You know, he's not
yes.
bullying these resources out of him. He's not throwing his weight around. He's throwing his weight around in the sense that like he has the final say, but his say is towards like absolute leniency.
Right, because he's just prioritizing the bigger picture of controlling
Yeah,
Arrakis, like, and just
yeah.
kind of
But
overlooking this when
in
it
that
seems like
room,
they all
yeah,
were freaking out. Like this was,
yeah,
yeah,
but
this was a big
in that
deal.
room, I mean, to me, does it almost seems like that's like that puts out an image of weakness,
Sure.
is how
And
I
he might,
interpret that.
that might be a conversation that happens too. Like,
Mhm.
who
Yeah,
knows? Who knows? It's going to be so interesting, the ramifications of this. Like, are
yeah.
the
Well,
two
it's
main
all
families going to fight and
yeah.
get blamed
I mean,
for it?
it's
Like,
yeah, it all relates to Desmond presumably killing Pruitt
right.
in the hallway and the
And
kind of the aftermath of that.
let's do that last scene next. Like there's one more scene I just want to hit, and then we can do that and close out the episode because we do just need to talk about the two Nez and what's his name again?
Kieran or Constantine?
Constantine. Nez and Constantine have their night out. Like they're gonna, I think she ends up
Yeah,
saying like we're gonna go party basically. Like this isn't
great.
gonna be happening. Well, I'm gonna be gone for the next decade. So like let's
Mhm.
just get this in. And they go to like whatever. They go to the little
The
techno
club.
club. Yeah, the club.
Yeah,
And couple things to point out here. The one just being obvious that we see a Freeman bartender. She's got the iconic blue eyes, and she's taking a lot of mental notes here. I don't know if that means she's like, was she an internal spy, or was she just somebody that is going to come up in future episodes as having been somebody that witnessed the Atreides and the Carino like hooking up,
yeah, they definitely spent some time on that.
showing that? Yeah,
And it was like, "Are we good?" And they were like, "We're good. We're good."
yeah.
I don't know how to interpret that totally. It did they imply that she's a Fremen or can't I mean, anyone's eyes can turn blue from the spice usage, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, weren't correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know if we know, again, with this concept of society, are there bastards? Are they all not just doing spice? Is that the drug that they're taking?
I didn't think it was spice. Otherwise, why wouldn't everybody's eyes be blue?
That's a great point. I don't know. I guess with my
I
limited knowledge of what goes on, I was like, okay, the only drug I know is spice. But do they even? Is it? Now I'm trying to think. That's just the reaction that Paul has to it, but not everyone has that hallucinogenic reaction to it during the movies. And also, it's the most valuable substance in the world. So I don't know if people are
if
doing it
just
as a
people
drug.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I think we're supposed to guess that that was a Fremen, but I don't know. I mean,
That makes
you're
sense.
making me question it, but I just assumed because it would make
No,
sense that some get off the planet.
I think the simplest answer is probably best.
Yeah, it was just weird the eye contact that the bartender made with
Yeah,
Kieran. So maybe that'll come back up. I'm sure it will. Or at least maybe it was just there to point out that there are Fremen ingrained in the society outside
yeah.
of Arrakis. Like it could have been either or. But I just want to put it on the board right now, and maybe you're thinking the same thing. But I'm guessing that Kieran gets her pregnant here.
Oh yeah.
Like there's a
Oh
okay, yeah.
yeah.
So you think the Atreides line passes on, and then the sisterhood's going to have to adapt around the new genetics being intermingled. That's going to be a fun chance for them to
I
give us
think
breeding program info.
I think this is like, again, does the breeding program, is it so specific that it's like Carino Richise genetic is what we need here based on whatever they know? Or is it just that like Nez Carino like having a husband? Like, I don't really know. Like, is the match more towards genetics, or is the match more towards the political ramifications that they need in terms of her being free for 10 years before Pruitt's of age? Not entirely sure, because I could see it being like a misreading of the signs, where like this is the marriage maybe that they saw in whatever they see, but the point was so that Nez is free to have a night like this because her husband is a twerp and she doesn't need to like consummate any type of marriage with him yet. So she's free to go out on this drug binge and then happens to hook up with an Atreides. And that's like the actual intended effect, not the intended effect by by the sisterhood, but like that's what the actual tea leaves were leading towards.
I mean, that's definitely possible, but I think in their head they wanted the genes of the Richises or
Oh,
whatever.
okay. Yeah. So you think the match was more towards DNA and then convenient politically more than it
Yes.
was
Well,
DNA conveniently biologic? Or I'm sorry, politically
I
conveniently
mean,
biologic. I don't know.
I think that's a good
Like for me,
question
like
now that
we're
you're
like
saying
I
that.
think we're reading really into the word breeding, where like that's like okay, like genetics, DNA, blah blah blah. But all the words that Valia says in terms of like the worldview and all, it all feels more political propaganda mindset based.
But if you think about it in connection to like the Dune movies, like
Yeah,
Paul
I just
Atreides
I don't know if they're there yet
was
though.
they might not be, and it might evolve to being that, but it's definitely biological. It's biologically important the Dune movies, I think, because
Yes.
like they're like purposely putting a Harkonnen and an Atreides together, which are like original great. Like I think that was all by design. So maybe
Yeah,
you're right.
I would
It could
agree.
just be Valia thinking of it in the political sense, but it ends up being for the
Yeah,
like down
she's
the
thinking too
line because of
small.
the. Yes, exactly. There's a chance it could. That's an interesting
Yeah.
thought. I didn't even think about that, but that's good. So I like that.
Yeah. And
Um,
maybe her thinking too small is what leads them towards this kind of apocalypse scenario. And that's when they realize, like, oh, baby, we need that Kwisatz Haderach.
and just to put it on the board, like I don't like. Are you under the impression that the apocalypse that they're seeing is something that they're trying to prevent and will prevent in between the 10,000 years before we get to Dune?
I
Because
mean,
I was under the
why
impression
not? That's a
that
lot of time.
I mean, no, like for sure, like
Yeah.
that's probably the more common like read on the situation. I was more on of the mindset that the apocalypse is like Paul Atreides, like whatever is going to end up happening, it like it's all going to lead to him being the messiah of whatever this world is, and there's a chance that they indirectly are pushing themselves towards the apocalypse, thinking that they're trying to prevent it. But again, I don't know. It could be your way. It could be like the bigger picture of like the Dune universe rather than just the Dune show. So who knows? But either way, it's an interesting plot device.
I liked all of those words you just said.
Yeah.
So I'm down if it ends up being that way for
Right.
sure. There's
Yeah.
some type of meaning behind the worm Shai Hulud swallowing whatever that castle was. I
Right.
almost interpreted that. I couldn't tell if that was a location somewhere or if that was like a future of Wallach 9 or 11 or whatever, because we know from the movies, spoiler alert, like of the history of the planet Arrakis, which super spoiler alert if you've never watched the movies, like used to be Dune. It had like, it wasn't a desert planet. The worms made it a desert planet.
Mhm.
So like, is there a future where like the worms go to more planets, one of them being that's what I'm saying, where I was trying to avoid a lot of the prophecy talk at the top because I don't really know.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
And that could have been a metaphor because it almost did look like the castle that got swallowed looked like the castle that we saw in this episode, but it obviously wasn't on a desert planet. I don't know what they're going for there, but we're gonna
Yeah.
keep
And I
touching
was
on it
also
because
thinking,
it's
yeah,
just
like
gonna keep coming back.
was it maybe a symbol of of knowledge. I'm not entirely sure, because when we get, and I guess to move us ahead into kind of this final scene for this planet, being kind of this conversation between the Emperor and Desmond, and the Emperor has access to these tapes of Desmond on Arrakis, and he gets swallowed up by the worm. And the way that made it seem was that like he was kind of reborn. I guess the thought that it felt like the show was telling me was that he was kind of reborn now with this power of whatever this power is. It seems to be the easiest logical conclusion to jump to.
That's going to be our last conversation, I think, because that's the most fun thing to talk about right now is basically what the deal with Desmond is. Because you're right, like he has that conversation with the Emperor one-on-one, and the Emperor implies, like in almost a joking way, like I'll become religious if this everything works itself out, right? And you can kind of see Desmond taking that to heart. Like, I'm going to do something about this to make that happen. I don't know if Desmond's goal is to then begin spreading religion, which could be part of it, or he just wants to just fracture what's going on the Emperor's planet. But I thought that was important, that as soon as the Emperor says, like, I'll become religious the second this happens, like Desmond like locked in for a second. And then the next scene we see is him killing Pruitt.
Yeah, it's hard. He seems very anti-sisterhood. He calls them witches. That's, that's check one on any box for anyone that's anti-sisterhood. But is he pro-emperor? That's what
you know, nothing.
I feel like he like is like trying to protect the empire by being anti-sisterhood. But it also feels like he has this supernatural now thing that maybe is a third motivation. There's something with him with this worm.
I didn't catch it the first time.
A lot of these visions were like the swallowing of the, like people getting eaten by the worm, getting swallowed by the worm, and then we see him. It seems like he did get swallowed by the worm. So what happened to him?
That's what I was going to bring up, because I, like, my first watch through, I didn't clock that it was Desmond, because I was just watching it live and figuring it out. And then the second watch through, it's kind of a little bit more obvious. You see the eyes, right? Like they're like blue, just like his, like kind of look like Desmond's eyes, whatever. I think it's safe to assume that it was Desmond. And what we're dealing with now, I have written down 3 possible options. And I just want to hear what you think about them, because off the top of this episode, I said I was going to bring in 2 lore things. The first was going to be the stuff related to the Great Machine War and like and Brian, his son. The second one is, in modern time of Dune, there are 2 things that exist. I'm being cryptic about it because I'm going to explain in a second, but like I don't know if it exists in the current day of whatever year it is right now, but in the year 10,000, when Paul Atreides is alive and like we're everywhere in the galaxy, there's a species of people that are called face dancers that essentially are shapeshifters. They can take your face for a little bit. There's a small chance that he is a face dancer. The second thing that there is in it that just exists in the future are these things, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, called ghoulas, like Ghola, and they are essentially reanimated dead bodies with like a different soul in it. That could be either of those things of what we're looking at with Desmond, because like you said, we basically saw him die. I don't know how they would get his body back to make him a Ghula, because it seemed like the sandworm swallowed up. There is a chance that he's a face dancer, because I think you just need a face dancer needs to see you and he can do it. And then the third option is that Desmond is straight up a computer AI. Like he is what the whole society is against, just in hiding. He had that connection to basically snipe out the lizard real quick, because maybe he's there. Like, and the only reason the AI thing is just totally random that came to my head, because I'm trying to rationalize what he did to Pruitt, and maybe if he has this sort of technology that's advanced that only he has, because AI has been snuffed out, computers have been snuffed out, maybe he can do something at like a technological level that burns your skin. I am just grasping at straws right now, but those are the 3 options I'm thinking right now of what explains why the Emperor saw Desmond die, but like he's here.
Once again, I liked all of those words. I think it's hard for me. The default almost is misremembering that magic isn't real, but there is explanations for things that aren't magic. And I liked all of those explanations, and they all feel, obviously they align with the lore. The AI one, like you mentioned, is more that something that you're kind of creating on the fly a little bit more than the concrete
Yeah.
lore things of the other two. So I just don't know, man. I feel so confident that it's not like a simple, it's just like poison. Like if he
Yeah.
is the same guy that got swallowed, it's none of those things, then there's some type of, and again, I hesitate to say power because then that leads almost feels like more like magic, but it's
And that's a thing in the Dune community. It's like the golden rule that there is no magic in the Dune
yeah,
books. I'm not saying that they can't change that, but that
yeah.
is like something that the Dune community prides itself on, that
Mhm.
nothing is magic in the Dune universe.
Yeah. I'm so stuck on this repeated imagery of Shai Hulud the worm swallowing everyone in the visions and then actually swallowing him, that like
Yeah.
that mechanism seems to be very important.
Either way, like that's like the most
Yeah.
interested concept, like what I'm looking forward to, because like we're like they're gonna find his body and they're gonna talk about it, right? They're gonna be like, "What the hell happened to him?" And maybe the
Yeah.
Emperor has seen something like this in the past, and that'll clue us all in, and like we'll have something to talk
Yeah.
about next episode. But
And I
it's
hope
at this
not. I
point
hope
we
it's a
don't.
mystery.
I hope it's a mystery too, but like there's
Yeah.
nothing we've been told that this could be a possibility, that it is like in the movies or just in the
Yeah.
first episode. So I'm good to leave it at that. It's just
The
something I
Emperor
thought was a great way to end the episode.
Yeah, the Emperor seemed concerned. Like I guess to me, I felt like he was like he saw that and like rushed out of the room.
He should be concerned because he's like, "Who was I
Yeah.
just talking to?"
Yeah, yeah. So I'm very concerned. I'm not concerned. I'm very interested in this immediate aftermath.
I hope
Again,
he plays it
because of
close to chest and doesn't
yeah, okay. Yeah,
like
because he seemed like, oh, like something's currently afoot. Not
yeah,
knowing
well, it
obviously the
is.
scale. Yeah, not knowing the scale of that Pruitt's gonna be dead in the hallway, but and then I'm so curious of what Pruitt's dad, what's that gonna be like? Because I mentioned, this will be my final thought, that their emperor says, like, we'll overlook his transgression for now. So that could be
Mhm.
easily, some people could latch onto that and be like, well, he said for now.
And then he killed him. Yeah, exactly. That's
And
an
then he killed him in
easy
the
riff.
night. And then
Yep.
that's like again kind of feeds into this idea of weakness, and it's like, oh, like the emperor has to have kids murdered in the middle of the hallway of the night. Like he can't just pass judgment in the light
Mhm.
in front of everyone. So again, I'm probably headcanoning that, but I'm just so curious to see what the immediate fallout, the reactions, the way he deals with it all is. That's why I think to me the emperor is the most interesting character.
And we went this whole episode without saying that that's Merlin too. If we didn't from the Kingsman, the Emperor.
Oh yes. Yeah, yeah,
You know what I'm
yeah.
talking
I
about? He's a
saw
great
someone on the internet call him discount Stanley Tucci, or just like other Stanley Tucci, and
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
the same thought I have every time I see him. But I believe his name's Mark Stone.
Mark Strong.
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 Oh,
You were
those are both
close.
strong last names.
Whoa, he's got a cool name. I'm looking at his IMDb. It's Javicco. This is the character, his first name.
Yeah, yeah.
Emperor.
The
I didn't even
Richise says it with some je ne
he
sais
says it?
quoi. Yeah, because it's not like it's Javico, it's got some spice to
It's
it. It's
got
got some
something there. Yeah.
character.
Mhm.
And he said it and I was like, I envision myself not saying it like that on the podcast, so I'm just gonna roll with the Emperor.
The Emperor,
That's what we're doing.
yeah.
Yeah, so
I
that's
mean,
what
the
we're doing.
Empress has Natalia as her name. That's easy, but we're
Yeah.
not doing that.
That's what I
So
was getting, I think, mixed up with Natalia, Valia, Tulla.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
I was
I mean,
throwing them all together.
audience, we will get it down. It usually takes
Yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit. And this is we're probably about to close out. Like this is our longer episode. It
Mhm.
always is for the pilots because we have to clarify like how much we know about the source material and everything. But this
Yeah.
was a fun conversation. I think next podcast, so next week, we'll have Paul be our third from Bingetown
Oh,
TV.
true.
So it will be a little like we'll have more of a structure too, just because we'll be on the other side of like the initial world building. I'm sure we're gonna get a lot more plot in episode 2, but this was a fantastic episode for me. Like I said, most of my complaints were more about it in context to the Dune movies, but the episode itself under a microscope was entertaining. I liked the world lore building that they were doing. And yeah, so your final thoughts?
Yeah, it feels like it's picture perfect pilot. PPP.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, we have an understanding of the political situation. We have multiple factions. We have, conspiracies afoot. We have a magic man, not magic. We have a non-magical man who seems like he might have magic, who's killing little children in hallways. So it doesn't really get much better than that.
Screw Pruitt anyway. I
He was a punk.
think that is going to do it for us, guys. So if you like what you heard, give Bingetown TV a follow on all the socials, like I mentioned at the top. Just make sure you guys are talking to us on Discord because that's our favorite place to be right now. Like it's the easiest spot to get one-on-one interactions with us. We're going to try and read every single comment on YouTube and the Discord, and we'll try and get back to you with as much as we can. Just
Honestly,
if you want to, go ahead.
Sorry to step, but the Discord has grown so much at this point that we're not even involved in a lot of the conversations. I mean, they just run, and it's just so nice to see the community grow and kind of take on not even a mind of its own, but just, everyone just gets so involved with each other. It's just great.
It's amazing to see. It gives us ideas. Like we get instant reviews of like the podcast and the videos, like all of that. So it's fantastic. But if you want to hear our host on other shows, because we cover a bunch of things at Bingetown, if you're only hearing this for Dune, we just got finished covering MGM Plus's From. What we have upcoming is we're currently also recording on Arcane Netflix. I'm sure you've seen that. That's one of the best anime shows of all time. Check out that coverage. Upcoming, we do also have Severance from Apple. We're going to be covering Dexter, Original Sin. I believe Yellow Jackets was just announced recently too. That's upcoming in the first quarter of next year. We got a lot in the works. I'm sure there's something else you can find. We cover so many different things, but for now, I think we're gonna leave it. Dune, hell yeah, baby! Once again, we are Bingetown TV, and thank you so much for listening.